If this found you, I'm glad you're here. Stay, like and subscribe. There's so much more in the archive. The machine told the whole truth the second it fired, the error, the size of its mistake. The people it reached were kept on the record and in the dark. The machine keeps no secrets. The decision about the people keeps all of them. There are events the record solves completely. Every cause can be named, every step can be ordered. The failure can be traced to the exact second it began, and the size of it can be set down to the decimal. We can rebuild the whole of it from the outside and call it understood. And there is a kind of comfort in that, a comfort that can become a kind of cover. A thing fully explained is a thing we believe we have mastered. We name its parts, and we feel that we have closed it, when in truth we have only measured it. This is one of those events. The machine at its center is, by now, one of the most completely understood failures in the history of nuclear weapons. And it is worth saying at the very start, what that does and does not mean. To solve an event is not the same as to know it. We can reconstruct a machine entirely, name every part, account for every failure, and still not reach the thing underneath. The machine can be transparent. The people who built it and the people who used it, and the reasons they reached for afterward can remain closed. A bomb can be fully explained, a decision cannot, not in the same way, because a decision has an inside, and the inside is not in the file. The machine confesses by its nature. The people who acted around it confess only what they chose to write down. On the 1st of March in 1954, a device built on a confident assumption did something its designers had ruled out. It was larger than they had said it would be. It was, in fact, more than twice as large, and the consequences of that error did not fall on the people who made it. They fell days later on people who had been told nothing, on the far side of an ocean, in homes that happened to lie downwind. The physics of that morning is now fully solved. We can name the device. We can name the second it fired. We can name the exact reaction that was missed, and the factor by which the weapon overshot. There is no mystery left in the machine. It confessed everything, within months, in the plain language of its own arithmetic. What was done with the people the error reached is a different kind of record. They were measured, they were studied. 3 years after the fallout fell on them, they were sent home to the place it had reached by the same authority that had measured how contaminated that place still was. All of this is documented, none of it is in dispute. We can read the assessments, we can read the orders, we can read, in the institution's own hand, a sentence describing what the peoples living on that ground was good for. The paper trail is long, and it is damning, and it is real. And there, at the center of it, is the gap. The record proves that the people were studied. It does not prove that being studied was the point. Between those two sentences lies the question this whole reading inhabits, and it is a question the archive will not close. Not because anyone has lost the page, because the page was never written. The reason inside the decision lived only in the minds of the people who made it, and they left behind the decision and the justification for the file, and nothing of the motive underneath. So, understand the shape of the thing before we enter it. This is not a story about a force beyond human understanding. There is nothing supernatural here, no intelligence in the dark. It is a story about the opposite, about a machine that understood itself perfectly, and about an institution that wrote down a great deal more than it perhaps should have, and one thing it never wrote down at all. The harm is on the record. The reason for the harm is missing from the file. That asymmetry between a fully solved machine and an unrecoverable motive is the whole of the dread in this account. We begin where the math began, with an apparatus that trusted its own numbers, and a proving ground built to test them, and a string of low inhabited atolls that happened to lie in the direction the wind most often blew. The Marshall Islands, a scatter of low coral atolls in the Central Pacific north of the equator, a great distance from anywhere a Western newspaper was printed. They are small places, most of them, rings of reef and sand barely raised above the sea, enclosing lagoons of clear water. People had lived on them for thousands of years, navigating between them by the stars and the swell, in a culture built on the relationship between a people and an ocean. They were among the most remote inhabited places on Earth. After the war, the United States held them, not as a colony in name, but as a trust territory, administered on behalf of the United Nations, governed by an American authority on behalf of a world that was not watching closely. The arrangement gave the United States control without quite the language of empire. And within that arrangement, in that quiet corner of the Pacific that almost no one outside it thought about, the United States built a proving ground. Bikini Atoll was the center of it. The name would later attach itself to a style of swimwear, a piece of trivia that has nearly buried the place itself. But the real Bikini was an atoll, and it had people. In 1946, those people had been removed. They were gathered together and told that their islands were needed for the good of mankind, for the ending of all wars, for tests that would help bring peace to the world. And on that understanding, they agreed to leave, and they were moved away to other islands. They were not permanently returned. The promise that they could come back did not hold. By 1954, 8 years on, Bikini was an emptied place with a single purpose. It was a place to detonate weapons in the open air over its own lagoon in the homeland of a people who were no longer allowed to live there. The wider complex was called the Pacific Proving Ground. It took in Bikini and to the west Enuitak, another atoll emptied for the same purpose. Around it ran the apparatus of a major military and scientific operation, a task force of ships at anchor. Control bunkers, antenna masts, camera towers, barges, and aircraft. A small armada assembled for a single kind of work, to fire a bomb in a remote place, and to measure with great precision what it did. This was not a hasty thing. It was an enormous, deliberate, well-funded machine for the testing of the most powerful weapons ever conceived, and it had been running for years. The operation that spring was called Operation Castle, and it was run by a body named Joint Task Force 7. Behind it stood the Atomic Energy Commission, the civilian authority that held responsibility for the entire American nuclear program, the weapons and the testing, and, as we will see, the people the testing touched. Los Alamos, the laboratory that had built the first atomic bomb, had designed what would be fired. The full weight of the American state, scientific and military and civilian, was assembled in that lagoon. It was an apparatus at the height of its confidence. Operation Castle was planned as a series, 6 thermonuclear shots across the spring of 1954, each a separate test of a separate device, in the years when the hydrogen bomb was passing from theory into a thing that could be carried and used. The first of the 6 was named Bravo. It was scheduled for the 1st of March, and it was to be the first test of a new kind of device, a kind the program had wanted for years, a kind that would change what a nuclear weapon could be. The geography of the test was known to the people who planned it. This must be stated plainly, because so much of what follows depends on it. They had charts, they had the distances, and the charts showed something that the planning had to account for or chose not to. To the east of Bikini, within roughly 100 miles, sometimes a little more, there were other atolls, and those atolls were not empty. There was Rongelap, low and green, about 100 miles to the east, an inhabited atoll with a settled community living the life it had lived for generations. There was Guinea, near it, where a number of the Rongelap people happened to be staying at the time. There was Utirik, further out to the east again, another inhabited atoll. And there was Rongelap, where the United States itself kept a small detachment, 28 men, an American weather and security post watching the same horizon as the islander. So even the program's own people were out there downwind. These were inhabited places, all of them. They had names that the people who lived there had used for as long as there had been people there. They had villages of woven structures and lagoons that fed them and gardens, and a way of living that was old and intact and entirely unaware of what was about to be done 100 miles to the west. It is important to be exact about this, because the rest of the record turns on it, and because the official account would later blur it. These were not unknown places, discovered after the fact, surprised by a danger no one could have foreseen. They were on the map. They had been on the map for years. They were east of Bikini, which is to say they were in the direction the prevailing wind most often blew. The people who planned the test knew the atolls were there, knew they were inhabited, and knew where the wind tended to go. And in the planning, The people who lived on those atolls were counted as nothing more than background, distant, downwind, beneath the notice of a program preparing to fire the largest device the country had ever built. Not enemies, not even quite consideration. Just people who happened to live in the wrong direction from a bomb. Bravo was to be the first shot. The geography was known. The people were on the map. And beside their homes on an islet built out on the reef, the machine was already waiting. The atolls were not empty. They were not unknown. They were on the map and downwind. It was called Shrimp. The name was small on purpose, the way weapons programs name their instruments. A plain word for a thing that is not plain at all. Shrimp, a creature small enough to hold in a hand. Its formal designation was the TX-21. It was a large object, in fact, more than 10,000 kilograms in mass, longer than a man is tall several times over. And it represented something the American program had been trying to achieve for years. Not just a more powerful bomb, but a usable one. A hydrogen bomb that could actually be carried and dropped in use. The first hydrogen devices had a problem, and the problem was the fuel. They worked. The principle had been proven. But they were not weapons in any practical sense. They needed their fusion fuel held as a liquid form of hydrogen chilled to a temperature near the very bottom of what is physically possible. A few degrees above absolute zero, holding it there meant refrigeration plants, and insulation, and heavy machinery wrapped around the bomb itself. The first true test of the idea 2 years earlier had been a structure more than a device, a building full of cryogenic equipment sitting on an island. You could prove the principle that way. You could measure the explosion. What you could not do was load it onto an aircraft and fly it anywhere. A bomb that needs a refrigeration plant is not a weapon. It is a demonstration. Shrimp solved that. This was its whole reason for being. Instead of a chilled liquid, it used a solid. Its fusion fuel was lithium deuteride, a dry, pale, powdery compound. It joined lithium to deuterium, a heavy form of hydrogen, in a solid that could simply sit inside the device at ordinary temperature, stable, waiting. There were roughly 390 kilograms of it inside Shrimp. A solid fuel meant no refrigeration, no plant, no impossible plumbing, no building wrapped around the bomb. It meant a weapon that could, in principle, be carried by a plane and dropped like any other. This was the breakthrough. Bravo was to be the first test of this dry design, and a great deal of the future of the American weapons program rested on whether it worked the way the paper said it would. The design rested on an isotope that designers had ruled out. The whole of the design turned on the lithium. And the lithium was not one substance. It was a mixture of two isotopes, two versions of the same element, identical in their chemistry, differing only in the weight of their nuclei, in the number of neutrons each atom carried. There was lithium-6, the lighter one, and there was lithium-7, the heavier one. In nature, lithium-7 is by far the more common. In the fuel that went into Shrimp, the mixture had been adjusted, enriched toward the lighter isotope, but only so far. Lithium-6 made up roughly 40% of the charge. Lithium-7 made up the rest, the larger share, about 60%. That ratio, 40 and 60, the intended fuel in the minority and the supposed passenger in the majority, is the hinge on which this entire event turns. The plan rested entirely on lithium-6. The intended reaction was elegant, and the designers understood it well, because it was the reaction the whole dry design had been built to use. When the bomb fired, the fission stage at its core, an ordinary atomic bomb in effect, would flood the surrounding fuel with neutrons. A neutron would strike a nucleus of lithium-6, and that nucleus would break into two pieces, a particle of helium and a nucleus of tritium, the heaviest form of hydrogen. That tritium, freshly made in the instant of the explosion, would then fuse with the deuterium already present in the fuel, and that fusion would drive the great release of energy that made it a hydrogen bomb. So the chain was clean. Fission makes neutrons. Neutrons strike lithium-6. Lithium-6 makes tritium. Tritium fuses and makes the yield. Lithium-6 struck by a neutron makes the very fuel that powers the bomb. This was understood. This was, on paper, the design. The other isotope was the question. Lithium-7 was the majority of the charge, 60% of the lithium sitting inside the device, and the designers had to decide what it would do under the violent conditions of a detonation. And they decided it would do, in essence, nothing. They concluded that lithium-7 was, for the purposes of the bomb, effectively inert, that it would sit through the reaction as a bystander, that whatever it did do, it would do so slowly, or so weakly, that it could be left out of the accounting entirely, dropped from the calculation of the yield. A passenger, present in the fuel, taking up most of the room, but not part of the event. The bomb, in their understanding, would be powered by the 40% and ignore the 60%. It is worth holding on this because everything that follows grows directly from it, and because it was not a careless thing. The men who made this judgment were among the most capable physicists in the world, working at the laboratory that had built the first atomic weapon. The assumption about lithium-7 was a considered scientific conclusion, not an oversight, and that is what makes it the particular kind of failure it is. The most powerful device the United States had yet built was constructed around two assumptions about its fuel. The first was that lithium-6 would burn as intended, and that assumption was correct. The second was that lithium-7, the larger part, would sleep. The machine was built around the lithium that would burn, and around the confidence, the careful, expert, documented confidence, that the rest of it would not. So the device was ready, and the assumption was sealed inside it. In 390 kilograms of pale solid fuel, and the only thing left to do was to predict how large the result would be. That number came next, and it came with a comfortable margin around it. The prediction had a margin. That is the first thing to understand about the number the program carried into that morning. It was not a single fragile figure balanced on a knife's edge. It was a confident estimate, with room built around it on both sides, the kind of number an apparatus produces when it believes it understands what it is doing. The designers expected shrimp to yield about 6 megatons. Pause on what that number already meant before it went wrong. 6 megatons is 6 million tons of conventional explosive, released in a single device in a fraction of a second. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was on the order of 15,000 tons. So the prediction alone, the number they were comfortable with, was already something like 400 times that. A scale the world had barely begun to imagine, and one that only a handful of people on Earth had any real sense of. This was not a modest device by any measure. It was by the prediction, among the largest things humanity had ever intended to detonate. And because no prediction is exact, they bracketed it. They did not say 6 and stop. They put a range around it. The expected band ran from about 4 megatons at the low end to about 8 at the high end. That spread, 4 to 8, was their honest accounting of their own uncertainty. It said, we expect 6, and we might be off, but not by much, and certainly not outside these bounds. Either way, whatever the precise figure, an enormous weapon. But, in their understanding, a known weapon, a weapon whose size they had bounded. Whatever it did, it would do somewhere inside that band. The band itself was the measure of their confidence. They were not certain of the exact figure, they were certain of the range. And it is the range, the careful, bounded, expert range, that the bomb was about to leave behind entirely. The shot was set for just before dawn, 6:45 in the morning, local time, on March 1st, 1954. The device sat on an artificial islet, a structure built out on the reef off Namu Island, at the edge of the Bikini Lagoon. It was, in effect, a small fabricated piece of ground, raised on the reef to hold the bomb and its instruments. Around it, in the dark before the dawn, the task force waited at distance, on ships standing off and on other islands miles away, behind dark glass, in the practiced quiet of a countdown. They had done this before. The procedure was routine. The only thing not routine was what was inside the device. There was one more decision that morning, and it belonged to one man. This is a detail worth holding because of where the responsibility sat. Authority over whether to fire did not rest with the senior military officer of the task force. It rested with the program's scientific director, a Los Alamos physicist named Alvin Gray. By the arrangement of the operation, The scientist held the final call on the detonation, above the military commander. Graves was the man whose decision it was, and on that morning the call in front of him was complicated by the one thing the apparatus could not control: the weather. The forecast showed the winds aloft blowing toward the east, and east was the direction of the inhabited atolls. East was Rongelap and Guinea and XIII. East was Rongelap, where the American detachment kept its post. The wind that morning, by the available forecasts, was set to carry whatever the bomb threw into the sky away from the open and empty ocean and toward the home. Toward the people. This was known before the shot. It was in front of the man who held the decision. The forecast did not have to be interpreted after the fact. It was there, that morning on the table. The shot proceeded anyway. Now, here we must be careful, because this is the first point at which the record permits a question it cannot answer. We know the winds were unfavorable. We know the forecast showed it. We know the decision to fire was made regardless. And we know who made it. Whether that was an acceptable risk, weighed and taken, or a reckless one, is a judgment the record allows us to. What the record does not contain, and what we will not assert, is that the shot was fired in order to send the fallout onto those people. Recklessness can be argued from the documents, purpose cannot. The winds were known, the intent behind accepting them is not in the file. What is not in question is the confidence in the number. They believed they knew how large the device would be. They had their figure and their comfortable band around it, 4 to 8 with 6 in the middle. They had decided what the lithium would do. They thought they knew how big it would be. They were about to find out they had the wrong isotope. The number was trusted. The winds were known. The shot went anyway. At 6:45 in the morning, the device fired, and the assumption failed in the first microseconds. This is the thing to hold on to. Before any of the scale, before the crater and the cloud, the error did not develop over the course of the explosion. It was there from the very beginning, in the first fractions of the first second, before the bomb had finished becoming a bomb, before any instrument standing miles away had registered anything at all. The part of the design that was supposed to be silent was already speaking. Lithium-7 was not inert. It had never been inert. The assumption had been wrong from the moment it was made. It simply had no occasion to prove itself wrong until the neutrons arrived. Under the conditions inside a detonating thermonuclear device, Lithium-7 did precisely the thing the designers had ruled out. Here's what they had missed, stated as simply as it can be. A neutron is one of the particles that makes up the nucleus of an atom, and in a bomb, neutrons fly free in enormous numbers, at enormous speed. When a nucleus of lithium-7 is struck by a neutron, and that neutron is moving fast enough, above an energy of roughly 2.5 million electron volts, it does not quietly absorb the neutron and sit. It breaks apart, it splits into 3 pieces: a nucleus of helium, a nucleus of tritium, and another neutron set loose. 1 neutron goes in. 2 particles plus a neutron come out, and one of those particles is tritium, the very fuel the bomb was designed to make from the other isotope, and the firing of the bomb produced exactly such neutrons, fast ones, in a flood, in the energy range that triggers this very reaction. Consider what that means inside the device, in the instant of the explosion. The designers had counted on lithium-6, the 40%, to be struck by neutrons and make tritium. That was the plan. But now lithium-7, the larger share, the 60% they had written off as a passenger, was also being struck, and was also making tritium. Fresh fusion fuel, in a region of the device the designers had thought was quiet, was suddenly being manufactured by the part of the fuel they had decided to ignore, and it was doing more than making fuel. Each time a lithium-7 nucleus broke, it released that extra neutron. Those extra neutrons went on to drive still more reactions, more fusion, and more fission in the uranium that surrounded the core, the heavy casing material that, struck by fast neutrons, fissions and adds its own enormous energy. So the reaction the designers had excluded was breeding its own fuel and breeding its own neutrons, and those neutrons were feeding the rest of the bomb in a cascade that compounded on itself. The reaction they had ruled out was the reaction that ran. The passenger was an engine, and the result was a weapon far larger than the one they had built on paper. The actual yield was about 15 megatons. Set that hard against the prediction, and let the gap stand. They had expected about 6, inside a confident band that topped out at 8. The bomb delivered 15. 2.5 times the central prediction, nearly twice the very top of the range they had been certain it could not exceed. Their honest accounting of their own uncertainty, 4 to 8, had been left entirely behind. 15 million tons of explosive force released in an instant on the reef off Namu Island. To put that beside the only comparison most people have, it was very roughly on the order of 1,000 of the bombs that had been dropped on Hiroshima in one device in a fraction of a second. It remains, to this day, the largest nuclear weapon the United States has ever detonated. And the character of that yield matters as much as its size because it is what reached the people. About 2/3 of the energy, roughly 67%, came not from fusion but from fission. The distinction is the difference between a clean explosion and a dirty one. Fusion in the main makes light elements and energy. Fission splits heavy atoms and leaves behind a vast wreckage of radioactive fragments, the fission product. 2/3 of a 15-megaton device coming from fission meant an enormous quantity of radioactive material lofted high into the sky in the cloud. And what goes up in a cloud like that does not stay up. 2/3 of the bomb, in effect, would come down again later, somewhere carried on the wind. As fallout, the size of the bomb determined how much. The wind would determine where. The scale of the event itself, measured coldly, is difficult to hold in the mind. The fireball was nearly 5 miles across. It was bright enough and large enough to be seen from Kwajalein, 250 miles away, a flash on the horizon at the edge of the world. Where the firing islet had stood, on the solid reef, there was now a crater more than a mile across. 250 feet deep, gouged out of the coral and the seafloor as though the reef were nothing. The fireball had vaporized millions of tons of coral and rock and seawater and lifted it all into the air. Within 10 minutes, the cloud had climbed to an altitude of roughly 25 miles into the high atmosphere and spread some 60 miles across the sky. A single bomb had made a weather system. All of this happened in less than a second of reaction. The minutes belonged to the cloud, but the event itself was over almost before it began. And the dread of it, for the purposes of this reading, is not in the noise or the light or the spectacle of the cloud. The dread of it is in the arithmetic. A number had been trusted carefully by capable people. The number was wrong, and the error was not small, not a refinement at the edge of a decimal. It was a factor of 2.5, an entire bomb's worth of unaccounted force, because of an isotope that had been assumed to be asleep and was not. And here's the part that defines this entire reading, the thing to carry out of this file above all else. The machine confessed. It confessed completely, and it confessed quickly. By July of that same year, only months after the shot, a theorist at Los Alamos, the laboratory that had built the device, could state exactly what had gone wrong in a single dry sentence. The lithium-7, he explained, had been assumed to be a far poorer fuel than it actually was. That was all. That was the whole of the error, named precisely, by the institution that had made it, within months of making it. There was no cover-up of the physics. There was no decades-long mystery about why the bomb overshot. The science was wrong. The science discovered how it was wrong, and the science wrote it down, almost at once. The physics held nothing back. That is what it means to say the bomb keeps no secrets. Within months, every part of its failure was understood and written down in plain language by the people responsible for it. And that is precisely the contrast on which this entire account turns, because everything that follows from here forward is about something else entirely. It is not about the machine. The machine is finished, explained, closed. What follows is about the people the secret fell on. The unwarned, who were not told for years, and in some matters were never told at all. The machine confessed within months. What was done with the people it reached is the part of the record that did not confess, and has not, and as we will see in the one way that matters most, cannot. The isotope they thought was asleep doubled the bomb, and the physics, unlike the rest, told the whole truth. The fallout went east onto the homes. 2/3 of a 15-megaton device had come from fission, and the fireball had vaporized something on the order of 10 million tons of coral and sand and seawater, lifting all of it into the sky. Now consider what that pulverized matter actually was. It was coral mostly, the substance of the reef itself, which is rich in calcium and strongly alkaline, caustic to the skin. And it had been mixed in the fire with the fission products of the largest explosion the country had ever produced, hundreds of distinct radioactive substances born in the instant of the blast. White dust, alkaline and caustic, laced through with radioactivity. That is what rose into the cloud, and that is what began, almost at once, to drift on the wind. To the east, the plume of it ran nearly 300 miles long. It spread across thousands of square miles of open ocean. It crossed roughly 15 atolls in its path, and among them it crossed Rongelap. At Rongelap, about 100 miles downwind, the ash began to fall 4 or 5 hours after the flash. Hold the ordinariness of that morning in your mind, because the ordinariness is the horror. A clear sky. The familiar light of the Central Pacific people, going about the start of a day like any other, fishing, cooking, children at play. And then out of that clear sky, a fine white powder beginning to settle. On the leaves of the breadfruit and the palms, on the woven roofs of the houses, on the sand, on the surface of the lagoon, in the open containers of drinking water, on the skin and in the hair of the people who were outside in it, doing nothing but living an ordinary day 100 miles from a place they had no reason to think about. No one had warned them. This is the center of the matter, and it must be stated as plainly as it can be. The people of Rongelap had been told nothing. There was no message. There was no instruction. There was no aircraft sent to evacuate them ahead of the fallout. No boat, no word of any kind. They did not know that a weapon had been tested 100 miles to the west. They did not know that a cloud was drifting toward them. They did not know what the white powder was as it fell on them. They had no reason to fear it. And crucially, no information that would have given them a reason. A thing was falling from the sky gently, like snow or ash from a distant fire, and nothing in their world told them it could hurt them. And so the thing that happened is, in its way, the quietest horror in this whole record, and the most important to handle with care. The ash fell, and the people did the things that people anywhere do with something strange and new and not understood. The children of Rongelap had never in their lives seen snow. And here was a fine white powder drifting down and settling on everything. They played in it as children would, as though it were snow. Some of them tasted it, some ate it. Women, finding the fine white powder caught in their hair, rubbed it in the way one might. There was nothing in any of this that was foolish or careless. It was the only reasonable response to a harmless-seeming snowfall made by people who had been given no other information because the people responsible for the falling of that ash had warned them of nothing. We record this not as spectacle but as fact, and we leave it there, with the dignity it requires. The ash fell from a clear sky, and the people were inside it, and no one had told them to be afraid. On the ground at Rongelap, meanwhile, the radiation field was rising. The instruments that would later be brought to measure it found a reading near 1,500 milliroentgen an hour. It is worth being precise about what that figure is and is not. That is the period figure taken by the survey meters of the time, a measure of how intense the radiation field was at the surface. In that moment, by the instruments and units then in use. It is not the reconstructed lifetime dose to the body. That is a different number, calculated decades later, and it belongs to a later part of this account. The 1,500 milliroentgen an hour is simply the contemporaneous field reading, and it was an extraordinary level for an inhabited place to register. And it was that high and rising, while the people of Rongelap continued to live in it, unwarned going about the day, and then having fallen, the ash was simply left there, on the people, on the ground, on the water, because nothing happened next, not for 2 days. The ships did not come for roughly 2 days. The exact hour is given a little differently by different sources, somewhere between 44 and 52 hours after the shot, and we will not pretend to a precision the record does not support. But the shape of it does not change with the hour, for about 2 days. The people of Rongelap, and the people of Guinea, and the people of XIII, and the 28 American servicemen on Rongelap remained where they were. Living inside the fallout, breathing the air of it, eating food that the ash had settled on, drinking water it had fallen into, sleeping on ground it had coated, the contamination had arrived in hours. The response, the evacuation, took days, and in the gap between those two facts, the dose accumulated, hour after hour, on people who still did not understand what was happening to them. The contact with the ash left burns where it had touched the skin. This is documented, and the mechanism is worth understanding, because it is part of why this fallout was so harmful at close range. The coral dust was not only radioactive, it was chemically caustic, strongly alkaline, and it sat against the skin and in the hair, carrying its load of radiation. The combination produced lesions, what came to be called beta burns, on the bodies of people who had been most heavily dusted. They appeared not at once but in the days that followed. We will not dwell on the course of what the exposure did to the people of Rongelap in their bodies. That is not the work of this account, and they are owed better than to be reduced to their injuries. It is enough here to say that the harm was physical and real and serious, and that it had a beginning that no one chose in the open, and that no one warned them of. A fine white ash on people no one had warned, and 2 days before anyone came. That is the thing to carry forward from Rongelap. The exposure was not a decision made in daylight, announced, weighed against the people who would bear it. It was a thing that happened to them in the time it took the apparatus that had caused it to arrive and carry them out. They had been told to expect nothing, and for 2 days, nothing is exactly what came, while the ash sat on the homes. The fallout did not stop at the atolls. The same morning, 80 miles further out, it found a boat. The fallout did not stop at the atolls. The Navy had drawn a line around the test, a declared danger area, an exclusion zone, a region of ocean some 57,000 square miles across, inside which the test would be conducted and outside which, by the program's own reckoning, it should have been safe to. The line was the program's statement of how far the danger would reach. The bomb did not respect it. About 80 to 90 miles east of Bikini, well outside that declared danger area, there was a small wooden boat, a Japanese tuna longliner out of the port of Yaizu in Shizuoka Prefecture on the Pacific coast of Japan. Her name was the Daigo Fukuryu Maru. In English, the name was rendered the Lucky Dragon No Fire. There were 23 men aboard her, fishermen, ordinary working men, fishing the open Pacific far from any place they understood to be closed to them. They had no part in the test, they had no knowledge of it, they were where fishermen go, doing what fishermen do, in waters the program itself had declared to be outside the danger. 2 or 3 hours after the shot, the same white ash that would fall later that morning on Rongelap fell on the deck of the Lucky Dragon. The crew saw it come down. Some of them, it is recorded, watched a strange light in the west before it came, and then the powder began to settle on the. They did not know what it was either, any more than the people of Rongelap did. They were outside the line the Navy had drawn. They were doing nothing wrong. They were beyond the very edge of the danger as it had been officially declared. And the danger reached them anyway because the bomb had been far larger than predicted, and the fallout had spread far beyond the bounds set for it. The ash settled on the boat, on the rigging, on the deck, on the catch in the hold, on the men themselves. And not understanding what it was, they did the only sensible thing. They finished what they could and turned for home, sailing for days back across the ocean with the powder on everything they owned and everything they had caught, not knowing what had settled on them, or on the fish they were bringing to market. The boat reached Yaizu in the middle of March on the 14th, near 2 weeks after the shot. By then the crew were ill, and the catch, the contaminated tuna, had already begun to move into the Japanese markets and distribution before anyone understood the danger. When it was understood, the fear was enormous, and it was national. Japan, less than a decade removed from the atomic bombings of its own cities, recognized at once what it was looking at. This was radiation, in their food, on their fishermen, from another American bomb. The country gave the fallout a name, Shi no Hai, the ash of death, and a fear of it spread far beyond the boat and its 23 men, through the fish markets, through the cities, through a population that understood this particular horror more intimately and more recently than any other people on Earth. The chief radio operator of the Lucky Dragon was a man named Eikichi Kuboyama. He had been aboard when the ash fell. That September, on the 23rd, he died. He was about 40 years old, and his death was the first that the world widely recognized as having been caused by a hydrogen bomb. And immediately, even in death, his death became contested. The two governments did not agree on what had killed him, and the disagreement was not a small or technical one. Japan attributed his death to the radiation. He had been heavily exposed, he had sickened, he had died within 7 months. The chain seemed plain. The United States attributed it to something else, to an infection, a hepatitis, contracted, in the American account through the blood transfusions he had been given during the course of his treatment, rather than from the radiation itself. We will not resolve that dispute, because it has not been resolved, and because for the purposes of this account, the dispute itself is the thing worth seeing more than any verdict in it could be. So state it precisely as it stands. Japan said the bomb killed him. The United States said his treatment did. What no one disputed was that he was dead, and that he had been a healthy man on a fishing boat before the ash fell. The harm was undisputed, only the cause was being argued. That argument is the thing to mark and to carry forward, because it was the first instance of a pattern that will run through everything that follows in this account. Notice its shape. The harm to these people, in every case we will examine, was real and undisputed and grievous. And yet, alongside the harm, almost from the very first day, there ran a second thing, an effort to shape how the harm would be explained. Not to deny it outright, which the facts would not allow, but to manage it, to attribute it elsewhere, to make it smaller or more ordinary or someone else's fault. The death of Kuboyama was real, and it was the first death. And the explanation of that first death was already within months being managed. Hold that pattern in mind. We will see it again on a far larger scale. With the people of Rongelap, Kuboyama left a single wish behind him, recorded in his own words. He asked that he be the last person ever killed by an atomic or a hydrogen bomb. It is worth noting in one quiet beat that the same incident, the boat and the ash, would soon surface transformed in Japanese culture, in the opening of a film about a thing risen from the sea by nuclear fire. But that is a footnote, and it is his wish that matters here. He asked to be the last. He was not. A boat outside the line, an ash with a name, and a death already being explained two ways. Within a week of the shot, the exposed people became a subject. On the 8th of March, only days after the evacuation, while the people of Rongelap were still being cared for at the American base at Kwajalein, a medical team began its work. It was led by a Navy commander, a physician named Eugene Cronkite of the National Naval Medical Center. There is nothing improper on its face about doctors attending to people who have been exposed to radiation. People who have been harmed need medical care, and these people had been harmed badly. But the work this team began was not in its conception only care. It was also a study, and the work it began would come to be titled Project 4.1. The plain description of that project, as the program itself framed it, is this: a study of the response of human beings who had been accidentally exposed to a significant quantity of fallout radiation. Read that description slowly, and notice what it makes of the people. The human beings in that sentence were the people of Rongelap and of the other exposed atolls. The accident that exposed them was the accident we have just described, the bomb that overshot and the ash that fell on the unwarned. And now, in the framing of the project, that accident had produced something of scientific interest. A group of human beings carrying a known and unusual dose of fallout radiation available to be observed. They were no longer only victims or only patients. They were now also a study, a data set with a pulse. The examinations began. The people were measured, sampled, recorded, followed, and it must be said clearly, because it is documented and because it matters enormously. Their consent to this was never asked. They were not approached as patients who understood they were being enrolled in research and agreed to it. There was no consent, informed or otherwise, sought from the people of Rongelap to be the subjects of a long-term study of what radiation does to human beings. They were a population that had been exposed, and that was now, by institutional decision made above them and around them, observed. The distinction between a patient and a subject matters, and it holds for everything that follows. A patient is treated for their own sake. A subject is studied for the sake of what can be learned. These people were both. But the second was never something they chose. They were the subjects of a study they had not agreed to be part of, and were not asked to join. And the project carried something else from the very start, something that turns it from an ethical failing into a documented act of concealment. It carried an instruction about silence in writing. The personnel of Project 4.1 were told on paper to keep quiet. The directive is documented, and its language is worth hearing closely, word for word, because it states its own reason out loud. Owing to possible adverse public reaction, the staff were to be specifically instructed to be particularly careful not to discuss the purpose of the project, its background, or its findings. That was the order. Do not discuss the purpose. Do not discuss the background. Do not discuss the findings. And the reason given in the directive itself was not national security, or the protection of the patients, or any operational necessity. The reason given was the possibility that the public might react badly. The concealment was, in its own words, to manage public reaction. This is the first hinge of the gap, and it has to be set down with precision, because everything in this reading depends on holding it exactly, and because it is exactly here that an honest account and an accusation can be made to look the same. Two things are true at once, and they are not the same thing. The first thing is documented and damning and beyond any dispute. An unconsented study of human beings was run on the exposed population, and it was concealed by design, not by accident, not by the ordinary defensible secrecy that surrounds nuclear weapons, but by an explicit written instruction to keep its purpose and its findings from the public, for the stated reason that the public might respond badly. A study on people who never agreed to be studied, hidden because of how it would look. That is on the record, that can be stated flatly, and it should be because it is true and because it is bad enough on its own. The second thing is the thing the record does not establish, and the thing this account will refuse to assert again and again, no matter how heavily the documents seem to lean. The directive proves that the study was secret. It does not by itself prove that the people were exposed in order to be studied. Those are entirely different claims. One says, a terrible accident happened and the institution responsible decided to make use of it and to hide that it was doing so. The other says the accident was not an accident at all. The exposure was arranged, the bomb or the winds were used on purpose to create the subject. The first is concealment of opportunism. The second would be an atrocity by design. And the secrecy directive, damning as it is, carries only the first. It says nothing about how the people came to be exposed in the first place. A guilty silence about a study is not a confession to having caused the thing the study examines. Hold those two apart, because the entire discipline of this reading lives in the gap between them. A study run on the exposed, concealed on purpose, is documented. We will say so plainly every time. The exposure arranged on purpose so that the study could be run is not documented. We will say that plainly too. The first is a fact, the second is a question, and the rest of this account will circle that question and weigh the few things that bear on it, and in the end it will not close it, because the record does not let us close it in either direction. A study with a written instruction to stay quiet, and consent that was never asked. So the study began, in secret, the week after the ash fell, and while it proceeded behind that wall of silence, the public was being given an account of the whole affair. A different account, told in the open, and told smaller than it was. While the study proceeded in secret, the public account was being shaped in the open. At the end of March, on the 31st, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission spoke at a press conference at the White House. His name was Louis Strauss. He was the senior civilian authority over the entire weapons program, and he was speaking, in effect, for the United States on the matter of what had happened at Bikini. What he said is documented, and it can be checked against the facts that were known at the time, and the checking is not kind to it. He acknowledged the scale of the weapon. Indeed, he leaned into it. He said plainly that a hydrogen bomb could now be made large enough to destroy a city the size of New York. On that point, he was telling the truth, and it was a truth meant to impress, a demonstration of American power offered to the world and to its adversary. The largeness of the bomb was not something to hide. The largeness of the bomb was the message, but on the people the bomb had harmed in the same appearance. The chairman made a series of statements that the record can examine against what was already known, and the examination is not kind to them. He said that the Japanese fishing boat must have been well within the danger area. Consider that claim against the facts already in the program's possession. It was false, and it was checkable at the time. The Lucky Dragon had been 80 to 90 miles from Bikini, outside the declared danger area, beyond the very line the Navy itself had drawn around the town. Her approximate position was known. To say she must have been inside the zone was to assert, against the available information, that the victims had brought it on themselves by trespassing, where they had been warned not to go. They had not. They had been outside the line. The danger had come to them. He addressed the injuries to the crew, the burns and the sickness, and he attributed them not to radioactivity at all, but to what he called the chemical activity of the material the fallout was made of, the converted coral. As though the men had suffered a chemical burn from an unusual caustic dust, an industrial sort of accident, rather than a radiation injury from the fallout of a thermonuclear weapon. This too ran against what was understood about the nature of the exposure. The harm was radiological. To recast it as a chemical irritation was to shrink it, to move it away from the bomb and towards something more ordinary and less alarming. And privately, away from the podium, in conversation rather than on the public record, the chairman floated something worse than minimization. He suggested that the boat might be a Red Spy outfit, a vessel of Soviet espionage rather than what it plainly and simply was, a tuna boat carrying 23 fishermen out of the port of VIII. We note this only as exactly what it was and no more, his documented private smear. The suggestion of a man reaching for a way to make the victims into something other than victims, to make them suspect, to make them deserving. There is no evidence whatsoever that the boat was anything of the kind. It was a fishing boat. We record the smear as a fact about the man and the moment, and we imply nothing about the boat, because there is nothing to imply. Set these statements beside the facts they contradict, one by one, because the gap between them is the entire point of this file. The boat was outside the declared zone, and its position was known to the program, and the chairman said it was inside. The harm to the crew was from radiation, and that was understood, and the chairman attributed it to the chemistry of the coral. The boat was a fishing vessel, and that was obvious, and the chairman privately suggested it might be a spy. In each case, the true thing was knowable. In each case, the statement moved away from it, and in the same direction, toward making the event smaller, and the victims less innocent, and the program less culpable. None of this was a mistake born of missing information. The information was available, the truth was knowable, and in the program's own hands, at the time the statements were made. And that is the crucial distinction, the one that makes this part of the record matter. A man can be wrong because he does not know. That is an error, and we would not dwell on it. What Strauss offered was not that. It was not an error of knowledge, it was a version. A public account, selected and shaped, that made the event smaller and the victims more doubtful than the available facts allowed, a chosen story. And once we see it as chosen, the shape of the whole affair comes into focus, and the two halves of it lock together. On the inside, behind the secrecy directive, a study of the exposed people was being deliberately kept quiet for fear of how the public would react. On the outside, at the very highest level of the program, in front of that same public, the story of the harm was being deliberately told smaller than it was. The same fear, the same management, pointed in two directions at once. Quiet on the inside, diminished on the outside. The concealment and the minimization were not two separate failures. They were one posture, the institution managing what was known about what it had done in private and in public at the same time. The boat was outside the line, the chairman said it was inside, and the truth was available. That was the public voice, measured, official, wrong in ways the record can prove. But there is another voice in this record, and it is the one that matters most. It is the voice the institution used when it believed no member of the public was listening. It wrote 2 sentences. They are next. The institution's own words are the heart of this. Everything to this point has been the shape of the thing from the outside. The device, the error, the ash, the silence, the public account told smaller than the truth. We have had to infer in places what the people inside the apparatus thought of what they were doing. We do not have to infer here. Because twice in documents that were never meant to persuade the public, never meant to be read by us at all, written for the file and for each other in the plain register of internal business, officials of the program set down what the exposed people had become to it. They wrote it in their own hands. They did not expect to be overheard. And the 2 sentences they wrote are the closest. This entire record comes to letting us hear the institution speak its mind. They are separate sentences, written 2 years apart, by 2 different men in 2 different documents for 2 different purposes, and both of them are real, and the precise attribution of each matters. So we will take them one at a time, slowly, and we will keep them apart. Because they are not the same sentence, and they do not say the same thing. And the temptation to blur them into a single damning quotation is exactly the temptation this account refuses. Each is damning on its own terms. Neither needs the other, and neither is the other. The first was written in January of 1956. It sits in the minutes of a Federal Advisory Committee, a body that advised the Atomic Energy Commission on matters of biology and medicine. This was a closed meeting of officials and scientists, the ordinary internal machinery of the program. The committee was discussing, among other things, the question of the exposed people and their contaminated home, and what should be done about them. And in the course of that discussion, an official of the Commission's own health and safety laboratory, a man named Merrill Eisenbud, was recorded reasoning about them. The sentence, as it sits in the minutes on the page the historians have cited, runs like this. While it is true, he said, that these people do not live the way Westerners do, civilized people, it is nonetheless also true that they are more like us than the mice. Hear what that sentence actually is. Underneath the dated phrasing, it is an official of the United States government in a closed meeting weighing the value of the exposed people for study and reaching in order to make his point for a comparison to laboratory animals, and notice the form of it is not an insult thrown in anger, not a slur spat out in a moment of contempt. It is worse than that in a way, because it is calm. It is a measured argument. The logic of it runs for the purposes of research. These people are more useful than mice would be, precisely because they are more like us than mice are. The human beings of Rongelap placed on a scale that runs from the laboratory mouse at one end to the civilized Western scientist at the other, and found to fall usefully high on it. Useful because human. That is the reasoning. That is the first sentence. We let it stand exactly as it was written. We do not soften it, and we very pointedly do not adopt the view inside it. The view of a people as a grade of laboratory animal. It is quoted here as evidence of an attitude in the institution's own voice, and the attitude is the subject, never the speaker. The second sentence was written 2 years later in 1958 by a different man, in a different document, and about a changed situation because by 1958 the thing the first sentence had been debating had been decided. The people had been returned to Rongelap, sent back to the contaminated atoll to live, and a physician from a national laboratory, Robert Conard of Brookhaven, the man who led the long medical surveillance of the exposed Marshallese for years, wrote his report on them. In the course of describing the situation of the people now living again on Rongelap, eating from its soil, he wrote, without any apparent unease, the habitation of these people on Rongelap Island, he wrote, affords the opportunity for a most valuable ecological radiation study on human beings. The various radionuclides present on the island, he went on, can be traced from the soil through the food chain and into the human being. Hear that one as carefully as the first, and keep it firmly separate from it, because they are constantly merged and they must not be. This is not the mice sentence, it is not by Eisenbud, it is by Conard 2 years later, and it is doing something distinct. This is a laboratory physician, the man charged with the medical care of these people, describing the bare fact that they are living on poisoned ground and eating from poisoned soil, and calling that fact an opportunity, a valuable one. The phrase is exact, and it is worth keeping exact, a most valuable ecological radiation study on human beings. Not data in the original, a study, and then the mechanism of the study written out plainly, almost diagrammatically, the radioactive material moving from the dirt, into the plants, into the people who eat the plants, traced all the way through into the human being. The contaminated home and the continued living of the people in it, set down in writing as a research opportunity by the very man responsible for their health. These are not paraphrases. They are not our accusations, put into the mouths of dead men. They are the sentences, as they sit in the record, in the institution's own hand. One from January 1956, by Merrill Eisenbud, in the committee minutes, The Mice. One from 1958, by Robert Conard, in the Brookhaven Report. The valuable study, The Food Chain into the Human Being. 2 men, 2 years apart, 2 documents, separate, both real, both written down by people who did not expect us to be reading. And here's what they prove, and what they do not, because the distinction is the whole discipline of this reading, and it holds even here, even at the loudest point in the record. They do not prove that the people were exposed on purpose. Read them again with that question in mind, and you will find it is not in them. Both sentences were written after the exposure. Both are about what the exposure had already produced and what could be made of it. Neither says anything directly about how the people came to be irradiated in the first place. The question of intent, the question of whether the fallout was arranged, is simply not what these sentences are about. They are about the use of a thing that had already happened. But what they do prove, the record can state flatly, without any reach at all, and it is enough. Once the people had been exposed, the value of studying them was spoken aloud. It was written down by the men responsible for them in the ordinary course of their work, in documents meant only for the file. The usefulness of these people's contamination, the scientific opportunity of their suffering, was recorded as a finding, plainly, by an institution that did not expect to be overheard and so did not trouble to dress it up. And when one of those men reached for a way to express the people's worth as research subjects, the comparison he reached for was a comparison to laboratory animals. That is not an accusation we are making. That is a transcription. The institution accused itself in its own minutes, in its own reports, and then filed the pages away. 2 sentences, 2 officials, 2 years apart, and both of them written down. Those 2 sentences are the spine of this reading. They were written around a decision, the decision to send the people back to the place the ash had reached. We have heard what was written, now we have to look at the decision itself. And then they were sent back. That is the fact, and it should be stated before anything at all is laid around it, because the fact alone is the weight of this file. Having been exposed, evacuated, examined, and made the subjects of a study, the people of Rongelap were returned to Rongelap, sent home to the very atoll the fallout had reached. And crucially, it was not done in ignorance of the danger. This was not a case of a government believing the home was now safe and acting on that belief. The danger was known and documented and on the record before the people were sent back into it. In 1955, an assessment had been made. The question it addressed was precisely the question that mattered, whether the people could safely be returned to their home. And the assessment found that returning them would still be dangerous. That finding is documented, it is in the record. The contamination remained on Rongelap. The ground was not yet safe for habitation. On the basis of that 1955 assessment, the conclusion was that the people should not go back. 2 years later, in 1957, they were returned anyway. About 82 of them, the surviving community of Rongelap, brought home to the atoll that an assessment 2 years earlier had found still too dangerous for them to live on. The finding had said one thing. The decision did the other, and the people would then live there for a very long time, roughly 28 years, nearly 3 full decades, raising families, growing old, burying their dead on contaminated ground that their own government had assessed as unsafe before it returned them to it. Think about what 28 years on that atoll actually meant, in the plain and daily terms of a life. They did not live there sealed away from the contamination. They lived from the place. They ate from the lagoon, the fish and the shellfish. They ate from the land, the coconut and the breadfruit and the pandanus. They drank the water, they cooked the food. They raised their children on an island where the radioactive material moved exactly as the laboratory had described it moving, from the soil, into the roots, into the plants, from the plants, into the bodies of the people who ate them, and into the animals, and into the next. The food chain that the 1958 report had named in writing as the object of a most valuable study was not an abstraction on a page. It was breakfast. It was the everyday act of eating in one's own home. It was the coconut and the fish and the cup of water. For 28 years, the people of Rongelap lived inside the diagram that a physician had drawn of their own poisoning and called valuable. And the same laboratory that had assessed the danger before the return now studied the people living in it after the return. The annual surveys continued. Year after year, the bodies of the people of Rongelap were measured. The radioactivity in them tracked as it moved and settled and did its work. The data gathered as they went about the business of being home. They had been returned to the contamination, and on the contamination they were observed. This is the documented core of the whole matter, and it is essential to see that it stands entirely on its own, without a single addition from outside the record. It needs none of the unproven claims to be damning. It needs no theory of secret intent. Lay it out exactly as the record gives it, with nothing added and nothing implied. A population was exposed, through no fault of its own, to the fallout of a weapon. That population was found on a formal assessment, still to be at risk from the contamination of its home. It was returned to that home regardless, against the finding, and it was then studied on the contaminated ground for decades, while a laboratory of the same government wrote down, in plain words, what the peoples living there was scientifically good for. Every one of those statements is documented. Not one of them requires us to claim anything the record does not contain. The documented record by itself is an indictment. And so the question sharpens here. To its hardest and most honest form, the form this whole account exists to hold open. There are two readings of the return, and they could not be further apart. In the first, the return was the abandonment of a problem. A careless, cost-driven decision to stop spending money on a displaced and inconvenient people, and to send them back to a home that was cheaper to declare safe than to replace, with the talk of scientific value laid over the top of it afterward as a comfortable justification. In the second, the return was the keeping of an experiment. A population deliberately maintained on poisoned ground, returned not in spite of the contamination, but in some part because of it, because the contamination was precisely what made them a valuable study. Those are two very different acts. One is negligence dressed up after the fact. The other is something far colder. And the record, for all that it gives us, will not tell us which it was. It gives us the decision. It gives us the justification written afterward. It does not give us the reason underneath the decision, the thing that was in the minds of the people who made it. That reason was never set down. Found still dangerous, returned anyway, studied on the contaminated ground for decades. That it happened is not in dispute. That someone wrote down what their living there was good for is not in dispute. The reason for the decision is the only thing missing. And in 1972, one of the people it had been done to stood up before the Congress of the United States and named the reason he believed it to be. In 1972, the charge was made aloud by one of the wronged. His name was Ataji Balos. He was a Marshallese representative, a man of the people who had been exposed, and he came before the Congress of the United States and said plainly what his community had come to believe. He told them that his people had been used, that the exposure had not been a simple accident but had been allowed and made use of in order to learn how to treat the casualties of fallout, that the suffering of the Marshallese had been, to the United States, an opportunity to study what radiation does to human beings, and he said why he believed they had been chosen for it. He said it had been done to them because they were not. He used a word for it, a word that the advocacy for these people has used ever since. He said his people had been made guinea pigs, laboratory animals, in everything but name. The same comparison the institution had reached for in its own minutes, now turned back on it from the mouth of one of the people it had measured. That charge is documented. Ataji Balos made it on the record before the Congress of the United States, and that he made it is a fact beyond any question. But the charge itself, the substance of it, the claim that the exposure was deliberate, is not proven, and this reading holds it precisely where it belongs and will not move. It is the accusation of the people who were harmed. It is given its full weight as exactly that, and that is a considerable weight, because the testimony of the wronged is not nothing, and it is not to be dismissed. When the people to whom a thing was done say what they believe was done to them, that belief is part of the record, and it deserves to be heard and held and taken seriously. But it is not the same as proof. It is testimony, not verdict, and so it is not converted here into a stated fact, because the record does not establish it as one. We hold it exactly there, in the place it actually occupies. The charge of the victims given its full weight, and never made into a finding the documents cannot support. To assert it as proven would be to abandon the discipline this whole account depends on. To dismiss it would be to silence the wronged a second time. So we do neither. We let it stand as what it is. That same year, the charge acquired a death. There was a child of Rongelap named Lekoj Anjin. When the ash fell in March of 1954, he had been about a year old. He had been on the Atoll, an infant, when the white powder came down. In 1972, 18 years later, he died of leukemia at a cancer institute in the United States, at the age of 19. We will say no more about the manner of it than that, out of respect for him. What must be said is this. To this day, Lekoj Anjin is the only Marshallese death that the United States has officially linked to the test. One conceded death on the American side of the ledger for all of it. A boy who was an infant when it began and did not live to 20. And there is one more document, and it pulls harder than any other toward the worst reading of the whole affair. It surfaced decades later in 1994, a planning paper from 1953, a prospectus written before Operation Castle, before Bravo was ever fired. And in that 1953 paper, there appears a reference to a Project 4.1, the study of the exposed people, named, it seems, the year before the bomb that exposed them, before the accident that supposedly created the need for it had happened. If that is what it appears to be, it is the single hardest fact in this entire record, because it would suggest the study was planned before the exposure, which is very near to suggesting the exposure was planned at all, so we must give the answer to it the same exact weight. The position of the United States is that the page was altered after the fact. That someone went back into the project list after Bravo and inserted the reference to Project 4.1 into a document that predated it. The government holds that every other record places the establishment of the study after the Bravo test, and that the operation's own final report states in plain words that Operation Castle did not include a biomedical program. Present both. Resolve neither. The 1953 prospectus is the hardest evidence toward pre-planning, and the official rebuttal is a coherent account that would dissolve it entirely, and there is no way from the documents available to determine which is true. Which account is correct is the one fact that would settle the entire question. That would tell us, finally, whether this was an accident exploited or an experiment arranged, and it is the one fact the archive will not yield. The charge was made by the wronged. The death was conceded, and the one settling document is the one the archive withholds. So the people had a voice that named the wrong, and a death the United States conceded, and a document that pointed at foreknowledge and could not be made to speak clearly. And in the end, more than 30 years after the ash fell, they did the only thing left to do. They left, and the government was not the one who helped them go. In the end, the people had to evacuate themselves, and the government was not the one who helped them. By the 1980s, the matter was no longer in any serious doubt to the people living it, whatever the certifications said. The home had never truly been safe. The assessment of 1955 had said as much before they were returned, and the decades since had only confirmed it. The certification that had sent them back in 1957 had been wrong, or worse than wrong, and 3 decades of living on the contaminated ground had made the danger plain in their own bodies and their own fear. So the Rongelap community did the reasonable thing. They asked the United States to do again what it had done in 1954. They asked to be moved. They asked their own government, the government responsible for the contamination and for their return to it, to evacuate them from the poisoned home it had sent them back to. The United States declined. And so a Marshallese senator, a man named Jeton Anjain, who was an uncle of the boy Lekoj, who had died of leukemia in 1972, turned to someone else. Not to a government at all, because the government had refused. He asked an environmental organization for help. He asked Greenpeace. And Greenpeace agreed to do what the United States would not. In 1985, the Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior, came to Rongelap, and it carried the people away. More than 300 of them taken off the contaminated atoll, with what they could carry and what they could load, and relocated to an island called Meshato in the Kwajalein Atoll. Understand what that move cost them. Meshato was a poorer place than the one they left. Bare, wind-scoured, hard, without the resources of their own atoll, without the lagoon they knew, with little to recommend it at all but one thing. It was at least clean. The people of Rongelap left a home that was theirs, and ancient and theirs by every right, a home that was the center of who they were, and they did it because that home was contaminated and a bare exile was not. They traded their own land for a hard and empty island because clean was the one thing their home could not be, and the one thing their government would not give them. The people the lab called a valuable study were carried out by a protest ship, because the state would not. It was the Rainbow Warrior's last voyage, only weeks after it carried the people of Rongelap to Meshato, in a harbor on the other side of the world, in Auckland, in New Zealand. The ship was bombed and sunk. It was an act of sabotage, an attack on the vessel in its berth. And a man who had been aboard for the evacuation, a Greenpeace photographer named Fernando Pereira, who had documented the people of Rongelap leaving their home, was killed in the bombing. We state that as the fact it is, and we do not reach beyond it into the separate story of why the ship was attacked. For this account, what matters is the shape of it. The same ship that carried the exiles of Rongelap to safety made one more harbor and was destroyed there, and a man who had photographed their leaving did not survive it. Now set two facts beside each other and let them rest there without embellishment, because they are damning enough as they are. The people whom a national laboratory had described in writing as affording a most valuable study were in the end carried out of that study by a protest ship. Removed from the contaminated ground, not by the state that had returned them to it, but by strangers, by an environmental organization with a single vessel, because the state that had put them there would not take them back out. That is the documented record. It contains no unproven claim. It does not require the charge of deliberate exposure, or the worst reading of the 1953 paper, or anything at all that we cannot support from the documents. A people were exposed through no fault of their own. They were returned to the contamination against an assessment of its danger. They were studied on that ground for decades. And in the end, they were rescued not by their own government, but by a third party, from a home their government had certified as safe and then refused to evacuate. It is, on its own, set down plainly, without a single word of speculation added to it. Damning enough, it has never needed the unproven charge to be a grave and documented wrong. That is the human record, end to end, as the documents give it. The exposure, the study, the silence, the minimization, the two sentences, the return, the exile. Decades later, long after, the instruments would come back and count the cost of all of it, as exactly as the cost could be counted. And the counting itself, cold and modern and peer-reviewed, is the next thing to hear. The arithmetic a register shift. Decades on, the instruments came back and counted. Set aside for this section the language of the closed meeting and the annual report. Set aside the voices and the intentions. What follows is a different register entirely. It is the cold register of the modern laboratory, the peer-reviewed reconstruction, the published paper under fluorescent light, the figure in a table, the number with its error bar. Years after the event, decades after, the science returned to this exposure with better instruments, better records, and better methods than anyone had in 1954, and it counted, as carefully as it could, what the bomb had actually done to the bodies of the people it reached. And the character of that count is itself part of the story this account is telling, because the count is exact where the bomb is concerned. And it is honest, scrupulously honest, about the places where it cannot be exact at all. First, the doses. The modern reconstruction, published in 2022, went back over the surviving records, the urine samples and the body counts and the deposition data, and rebuilt the exposures atoll by atoll. At Rongelap, where the ash fell thickest, the external whole body dose has been reconstructed at roughly 1600 milligray. That is a very large dose. And the dose to the thyroid, the small gland in the throat that draws in radioactive iodine and concentrates it, was far higher still, on the order of several thousand milligray for the community as a whole, and higher again for the children, whose smaller thyroids took a heavier dose from the same exposure. On the other atolls, the doses were lower but real, and they fall in the order you would expect from the geography. At Rongelap, where the American detachment of 28 men had been, on the order of 900 milligray, at Atoll in Guinea, a few hundred, at Uteric, further out to the east, lower again. And the crew of the Lucky Dragon, dusted at sea, closer to the shot than some of the atolls, carried a whole-body dose reconstructed in the thousands of milligray, higher than any of the inhabited islands. Each number sits where the distance and the wind would put it. The reconstruction is orderly, the harm has a shape, and the shape is the shape of the fallout. These are the modern figures in the modern unit, the milligray. There are older figures too from the period itself recorded in the older units, the rad and the Röntgen. They describe the same exposures by different methods of different vintages. We keep them apart. We do not add the modern figure to the period one or average across them because they are not measurements of different things to be combined. They are two separate attempts to measure the same thing, and only confusion comes of merging them. The modern reconstruction is what this count rests on, and in its own unit it is what it is. The modern work could even name which part of the fallout did the harm, and the answer is itself a quiet indictment of the silence in those first days. It was not mostly the long-lived iodine that became infamous in later disasters, the iodine that lingers for weeks. Because the exposed atolls were so close to the shot, in space and in time, the great majority of the thyroid dose, something like 80 to 90% of it, came from short-lived radioactive iodines and tellurium. Isotopes that decay in days, delivered in the milk and the food and the water in the very days when no one had been warned, when the people were still eating from contaminated ground because no one had told them to stop. The most harmful part of the fallout was the part that does not last, which means the damage was done early in the window when a warning would have mattered most, and no warning came. Decades on, the instruments came back and counted it all, everything but the reason. Then the cancers. A national institute, decades on, reconstructed the doses across the whole exposed population and projected the toll into the future. The projection was about 170 excess cancers, radiation-related cancers, that is, cancers that would not otherwise have occurred across a population of some 25,000 exposed Marshallese. That figure works out to roughly 1.5% of all the cancers those people would ever develop from every cause. A real number, a serious number, and a careful one, surrounded by its own honest range of uncertainty. And the study found something else which it is important to state correctly, because it has sometimes been reported backward. The proportion of cancers attributable to the fallout was highest exactly where the exposure had been highest. At Rongelap, where the ash fell thickest, the great majority of the thyroid cancers, the large share of them, are traceable to the test. That is the correct direction, and it is the direction that makes physical sense. The most exposed place carries the highest attributable fraction. The harm tracks the dose. Where more fell, more fall. The clinical record agrees, within the limits of what such studies can show. A screening of more than 3,700 Marshallese, all of them born before the bomb, found a clear burden of thyroid disease, dozens of thyroid cancers among them. The study looked for a dose-response relationship, the signature pattern in which more exposure means more disease, and it found a trend in that direction. But it was honest about the strength of it. The trend was suggestive, the statistics said. It was not by the formal measure statistically significant. A signal, visible, real in its direction, but not clean enough for the mathematics to certify. The science reported it exactly so, neither inflating it nor dismissing it. And the deaths. We must be disciplined here, because the temptation to a round, large, terrible number is strong and the record does not support it. The deaths the United States has formally conceded, officially attributed to the fallout of this test. Number 2, a Japanese radio operator dead within 7 months. And a Marshallese boy dead 18 years later, who had been an infant when the ash fell, 2 conceded deaths. The broader harm is real, and it is in the projected cancers and the documented thyroid disease, but it is a projection and a burden, not a body count, and we will not turn it into one. And then one more number, which is not medical at all, and which belongs in this ledger because it is also a measurement of what was done. After the years, after the documentation, after the harm was at last acknowledged enough to be adjudicated, a tribunal was established to compensate the harm done to these people. It heard the claim, it weighed them, and it rendered its judgments, and the judgments in total for personal injury and for lost and ruined property came to more than $2 billion in damages. That is what was awarded. That is what the harm was formally found to be worth, and what was actually paid against those judgments was less than $4 million. The fund that was meant to satisfy the awards was capped and it ran out, and the rest went unpaid. Hold the two figures together. More than $2 billion in adjudicated harm, less than $4 million paid against it, a fraction of a single percent. We state it exactly as the ledger states it, the awarded and the paid side by side, and we let the distance between the two numbers stand entirely on its own, without a single word of editorial laid over it. The numbers do not need our help. So the machine is fully known and the harm is partly counted, and both of those are findings set down in the cold language of the published paper and the tribunal's ledger. The doses reconstructed atoll by atoll. The cancers projected. The 2 deaths conceded. The damages awarded and almost entirely unpaid. All of it is on the record now, measured as well as it can ever be measured, and yet for all of it, none of it is the gap. Every number we have just heard is an answer to a question. The record was willing to answer. The doses, the cancers, the deaths, the dollars, the record gives them up. The one question it was not willing to answer, the one it cannot answer, is the one that remains when all the counting is done. And it is the one we turn to now. Here's what the record cannot give. We have come a long way through what it can, and it is a great deal. The bomb has been reconstructed completely, to a degree of detail that is in its way total. The second it fired, the isotope that woke when it was supposed to sleep, the exact reaction that ran, the factor by which it overshot, the drift of the ash on the wind, the doses in the soil and in the bodies, reconstructed atoll by atoll, the cancers projected, the dates, the 2 deaths conceded, the damages awarded and the pittance paid. All of that the record gives up, and more than that, far more than we usually get. We have the sentences the officials wrote about the people in their own closed meetings and their own annual reports when they thought no one outside was listening. The mice, the valuable study, the food chain traced into the human being. We have read all of it. The record has been, in almost every respect, extraordinarily forthcoming. But there is one thing the record refuses, one, and it is not a small or peripheral thing. It is the thing this whole account has been circling from the very first frame, from the cold open, before any name was spoken. It is the reason inside the decision to send the people home. Understand exactly what kind of absence this is, because it is a particular and a stubborn kind, and it is easy to mistake for something it is not. It is not the absence of a file that was lost. It is not a redaction, a blacked-out page that someone could, in principle, unblack. The administrative record here is not empty at all. It is, in fact, remarkably full. It is full of decisions and full of the justifications attached to those decisions, the reasons offered at the time, for the file, for the record, for posterity. We can read the assessment that found the return would still be dangerous. We can read, in effect, the decision that returned the people anyway, 2 years later, against it. We can read the sentence written afterward, describing what their living on that contaminated ground was scientifically good for. The decisions are all there, the official reasons are all there, the paper is thick. What is not there? Anywhere in all that paper is the interior of those decisions, the motive underneath the stated reason. The record gives us the what in exhaustive detail, and it gives us the official why, the justification put down for the file. It does not give us the true why, the reason that actually lived in the minds of the people who decided. And here's the precise trap, the thing that makes this gap unbridgeable rather than merely unfilled. We can read that the return was justified, and we can read how it was justified. But we cannot read whether the value of the study was the reason for the return, or whether the value of the study was a rationalization, reached for afterward, laid down comfortably over a careless and cost-driven choice that had at bottom nothing to do with science at all. And the cruelty of it is this: those two utterly different acts, the cold experiment and the callous economy, would leave behind exactly the same paper trail. The same assessment, the same decision, the same sentence about the valuable study. The documents that survive cannot tell the two apart, because the difference between them was never a thing that went onto paper. It was a thing that lived only inside the people, and the people are gone. And the one document that might have decided it, the 1953 paper that appears to name the study before the bomb that made it necessary, is precisely the document the archive will not resolve. It is either the hardest evidence of foreknowledge in the entire record, or a page altered after the fact, and there is no way from what survives to make it speak clearly. The one thing that could close the gap is the one thing the gap is made of. So the question that closes this reading is not what failed in the machine. That question is answered completely to the microsecond, and it has been answered since July of 1954. The question that remains is the other one. The one that has been waiting underneath everything, beneath all the physics and all the arithmetic, since the first frame of this account. It is a single question, and it can be put in a single breath, and it cannot be answered at all. The bomb we have to the microsecond. The reason they were sent back, we have only in a sentence about what their living there was good for. When the United States returned the people of Rongelap to an island it had measured and knew was contaminated, was it abandoning a problem, or was it keeping an experiment? And is the difference written down anywhere at all? Or does it exist only in that one sentence about what their living there was good for? The record proves they were studied. That much is documented plainly beyond dispute, and we have said so plainly throughout, in every file that touched it. It cannot prove, and this is the firewall that holds to the very end, it cannot prove, and equally it cannot disprove, that being studied was the point, that being studied was the reason they were left and returned and kept. That is the edge the record will not cross in either direction. It will not cross it toward innocence and clear the decision of the worst reading, and it will not cross it toward guilt and convict the decision of design. It holds exactly at the line of what can be known. The study is fact. The study as the purpose is the open question, and the open question stays open. That absence is the gap, not a thing hidden that better searching might one day uncover, not a document waiting in a box for a more diligent historian. A thing that was never written down at all, because the only place it ever lived was inside the decisions of people who are now gone, and who left behind them the decision and the justification for the file, and not one word of the reason underneath. The reason died with them. If it was ever a single nameable thing at all, it is unrecoverable. It is permanently, structurally unrecoverable. And it is the thing this account has been circling from the first frame, the dark center around which everything else, all the solved physics and all the counted harm has been arranged. We can rebuild the machine entirely, we cannot recover the mind. The bomb told the whole truth. The people were kept on the record, and the reason was never written. What the bomb confessed, and what it never said. The bomb confessed everything. This is the strange shape of the whole record, and it is the thing worth ending on, the machine. The thing of metal and lithium and uranium and confident calculation held nothing back from us. The assumption it was built on, the error inside that assumption, the exact reaction that ran instead of the one intended, the factor by which it overshot, the size to the decimal of the mistake, all of it was understood and named and written down within months of the morning it fired. There is, in the end, a kind of terrible innocence in the machine. It did exactly what its physics dictated, and then it allowed that physics to be read completely by anyone who came after. The most destructive object the country had ever built was also, in the strict sense, the most honest thing in this entire account. It told the whole truth about itself all at once, and it asked for nothing, and it hid nothing, because a machine cannot. It was the people the mistake reached who were kept in the dark, and then, having been kept in the dark, kept on the record. Consider the whole arc of it one last time, gathered into a single line. They were not warned of the ash. They were not told what it was. They were left in it for 2 days. They were studied without their consent, under a written instruction to keep the study quiet. The harm done to them was minimized in public at the highest level against the known facts. They were returned to their contaminated home against an assessment of its danger, and studied there for decades, while a laboratory wrote down what their living on that ground was worth. And when at last they could bear it no longer, their own government refused to move them, and strangers had to carry them out. All of that is documented, every piece of it, and all of it is damning, and not one piece of it required us to claim a single thing the record does not contain. And underneath all of it, beneath every documented act, the one thing that was never written, the reason for the decision to send them back. We can rebuild the machine to the microsecond, and we cannot recover the motive, and we never will. That is the final asymmetry, and it is where this account has to leave it, because it is where the record leaves it. The dose is still in the soil of Rongelap. The reason is still missing from the file. One of those is a fact of physics, slowly decaying on its own schedule. The other is a fact of human silence, and it does not decay at all. It simply stays missing. The question stays open, exactly where the record leaves it, because the record was built, in the end, to leave it open. If the lithium had behaved as they predicted, and the ash had never fallen on Rongelap, would anyone have written that sentence about the human beings in the food chain? Or did the accident only uncover a willingness that was already there? The file does not say. It keeps the decision the way the soil keeps the dose. If this found you, I'm glad you're here. Stay, like and subscribe. There's so much more in the archive.